Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar. We will be discussing eviction next steps. I'm going to go ahead and wait just a moment for other people to join the webinar.
Buenas noches a todos. Estamos a punto de comenzar el seminario referente a avisos de desalojo. Vamos a esperar unos minutos más para ver si se une más gente.
Okay, we'll just wait a couple more seconds.
Vamos a esperar un par de segundos más.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Bill, it is just you at the moment. I know some people might join a little bit later. So do you want Spanish translation, or you're fine with just English?
En este momento solo está usted. Vamos a empezar en unos segundos. ¿Necesita traducción al español o está bien con el inglés?
Hi, Andrea. I can record this if you do it in Spanish.
Okay, that's not a bad idea.
Well, no, you can run through it and just run through it in English. And is there a lot of new stuff?
No.
Okay.
But we're gonna send out the PowerPoint and the slides anyways, and those are in English and Spanish. So the information will be there in Spanish.
Okay. So just English.
Okay, perfect. And then Espe and Elena, if you want to stay on in case someone joins a little bit late, stay on for a couple more minutes.
I can stay, yeah.
All right. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, and of course, as a reminder, city staff is not able to offer any legal advice, but we do offer facts, best practices, and overviews of our local rent stabilization program and other state laws. And we'll go through introductions. My name is Andrea Kennedy, and I work with the City of Mountain View. We also have Joanne Pham on the line, who will be doing the second part of the presentation, and helping us with translation tonight is Esperanza and Elena, who are also city staff. All right, just a quick overview of how the webinar will work. City staff will give the presentation, and then anyone on the line can use the Q&A function or raise their hand to ask a question. And we'll be taking a break sort of in the middle to ask any questions. And again, we'll have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. And also, since we are on Zoom, I always do like to mention, if we run into any technical difficulties, please just log back into the Zoom using the same link, and we'll pick up right where we left off. All right, and this is the question slide. So anytime this pops up, you'll know it's time to ask your question. Also here on the bottom right, we have our contact phone number and email. If you want to write that down or just save this somewhere so you can know how to contact us in the future. And for the agenda this evening, we will be going over the eviction moratorium. We'll be talking about the eviction process in California. and we'll finally be going over how the Housing and Eviction Prevention Center. All right, so let's start by talking about the eviction moratorium. So there are 3 important stages that each have different requirements and provide different protections. I know it's a lot of dates, so we of course don't expect anyone to remember these, but again, as I mentioned, we will be sending out the PowerPoint so you can use this as a reference. So we'll begin by talking about the protected time period, which starts March 2020 and goes through August 30th, 2020. We will then talk about the transition time period from September 2020 to September 30, 2021. And then finally, we'll talk about the period we're currently in, which is the recovery time period, going from October 2021 to June 30, 2022. Okay, so the first time period, again, that's March 1st, 2020 to August 30, 2020. During this time, if a tenant was unable to pay their rent because of COVID-19 and they had a financial hardship, they cannot be evicted for that rent that was past due. So all they would have to do to be protected is return the COVID-19 financial declaration form, and they were to do that within 15 days of receiving the notice from their landlord, which would be attached to a notice to pay rent. So if you did that thing, then you will not be evicted for rent. You do have to pay it back, but you cannot be evicted from your house for it. And Joanne will talk a little bit more about the process in the next section. Okay, so now we'll talk about this transition time period, which was September 1st, 2020 to September 30th, 2021. And in this time period, tenants cannot be evicted for failing to pay their rent because of a COVID-19 financial hardship if they did 2 things. So first, they had to return that same hardship declaration form back to their landlord within 15 business days. And they also needed to pay 25% of all the rent that was due between September 1st, 2020 and September 30th, 2021 by that September 30th, 2021 date. So if they did both of these things, they cannot be evicted for that rent. All right, and finally, we'll talk about the recovery time period. So this started October 1st, 2020, and it's going through June 30th, 2022. So tenant eviction will be on hold if that tenant applied for state rent relief for rent through March 31st, 2022, and their application is still pending. So this new period, we just had an extension, which allows a little bit more time for the state to process all of these applications that went through, and then pay that money out to the landlords. So a tenant eviction will be on hold for any rent that they weren't able to pay because of COVID through March 31st, 2022. And that protection stays in place until June 30th of 2022. Okay, so now that we're in April, what happens? So of course, we want to remember again that if the tenant applied for state rent relief through the final application date, which was March 31st, 2022, and their application is still pending, their eviction will be put on hold. All right, but it is really important to know that current rent, April rent, May rent, June rent, and rent moving forward needs to be paid in full by the tenant. All right, even if their application is still pending, because the application doesn't cover April rent forward, right? So any current rent needs to be paid. All right, and if possible, we want to start paying that rent for April, and we want to be very clear to write on the payment or on the check that that rent that you're paying is for April. So you can write it on the check, rent for April 2022. If you do your rent payments electronically, a lot of times there's a note section. So you want to just specify this is rent for April 2022. So that way the landlord doesn't apply that rent to any rent in the past that you have already applied for rent assistance for. Okay. The next thing, if possible, if you can't pay your April rent and you have received a termination notice, we're not encouraging partial rent payment, right? People still can be evicted for partial rent payment. So we're not encouraging that at this time. But the most important thing, and if you walk away with anything from this webinar, is to please visit us in person or on Zoom at our Housing and Eviction Prevention Center as soon as you receive a notice, okay? That's when we have the most opportunity to sort of intervene and make sure we do everything we can to keep you in your home. All right, so let's look at what to do if you can't pay your rent for April and you receive a 3-day notice to pay rent. So stay in your home. Tenants do not immediately and automatically need to move out just because you receive a notice. There are certain steps that you can still take after you receive your 3-day notice to pay rent. So stay in your home and come and see us. So contact the Housing and Eviction Prevention Center immediately, and we can review the notice and your options. We also have available legal referrals and assistance. We can look at what sort of rent assistance might be available, and we also partner with other organizations that provide other sort of services that may be useful. And this here is just an example of what a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit looks like. So you'll see it will have the name and address. It will also clearly list out here what rent is due for which months and how much rent. And then it will let you know where that rent can be paid. So this is sort of a typical 3-day notice to pay rent. So if you get one of these, come and see us. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about what to do if you receive court paperwork. So this will come after a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. This is sort of the beginning of the actual eviction process. Right, so again, just because you receive the paperwork, you don't need to automatically move, but it is important that you file what's called an answer. So this is a formal court document. Again, you don't have to do this on your own. That's why we really recommend that you come in and we can sort of hand you over to legal assistants and they can help fill out these forms with you. All right, so contact us immediately and we, again, will help you through that process. And we can also see if there's any other type of assistance we can provide. All right, so this court paperwork that we're talking about, this is a summons. So it looks just like this picture here on the right. Right, so this is a court document that is required to be served on the tenant to request that they attend the court hearing. Right now, these summons are always in English. So again, we have our Spanish assistance available at the Help Center. So we encourage you to come see us so we can sort of help make sense of any of these documents. Okay, and the answer form that I mentioned earlier. This is what that looks like. It is available online. It is available in English and Spanish, but the Spanish version currently is not being filed in the court. So you will have to fill out an English version and submit that back to the court. But again, you're not on your own. Come see us at the Help Center. We can refer you to one of the attorneys, or there's also a self-help center in San Jose, and they can help you understand and complete this paperwork as well. Okay. And I do just want to mention, Joanne will talk a little bit later about why it's so important to file an answer when we're looking at the eviction process and the flow chart. So now, of course, let's talk about constructive evictions, and they are absolutely not allowed. So anything that is changing of the locks, cutting off utilities, harassment, preventing tenants from entering their unit, or even any habitability problems that go uncorrected and dismissed by the landlord, they're not allowed. So these are things that would create a situation so bad where the tenant might have to just move, or if the living situation would be so bad that it becomes a situation where you're unable to live in the unit. So that's called a constructive eviction, and that's not allowed. The only way to truly evict a tenant is to serve the termination notice, and then follow up with that, serve the court paperwork, and go through the court process. Okay, so we'll pause quickly here. I see we do have someone else who joined us. Can we ask Espe or Elena if they require Spanish translation?
Hola, buenas noches. Estamos viendo que hay una participante. No sabemos si usted, Marina, requiere traducción al español o está bien con el inglés.
And you can go ahead and answer that, or if you can type it in the chat, you can unmute yourself also.
Hola, Marina, no sé si nos está escuchando, solo para saber si está bien. Intérprete, por favor. Pone.
Okay.
Hola, sí, quería yo una intérprete, por favor. Gracias.
Thank you. All right, so if there are any questions about that last section, go ahead and raise your hand or type in the Q&A. And Marina, we will go ahead and do the rest of the presentation in both English and Spanish. And if you have any specific questions at the end, we will be sure to answer all of your questions.
Marina, vamos a hacer el resto de la presentación en inglés y en español. Por lo tanto, si hay alguna pregunta específica que quiera hacernos, lo puede hacer al final de la presentación, ¿de acuerdo?
I see a hand by Phil, if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was wondering, have you all been receiving any evictions here in Mountain View?
So the CSFRA only requires covered units to send in that paperwork. We haven't had any in the last month or so, and maybe before that it was only 1 or 2. But since that March 31st date passed, we haven't had anyone submit a UD notice.
La pregunta era si ha habido alguna orden de desalojo en Mountain View. Entonces, la explicación es que debido a la nueva ley de renta justa, en el último mes no ha habido ninguna. Previamente, antes de que acabara el plazo del 31 de marzo, sí que había normalmente 1 o 2 al mes, pero en el último mes no ha habido ninguna.
So I assume people have not been contacting the help center either about that.
I'll wait for translation, I'm sorry.
Entonces deduzco que no ha habido gente que haya contactado sobre este motivo, sobre las notas de desalojo en el centro de desalojo.
People have been coming to the help center more so with termination notices, 3-day notices to pay rent or quit, but we haven't seen UD paperwork yet.
Thank you.
La gente ha estado viniendo al centro del desalojo, pero no hemos, han estado viniendo más, pero no hemos visto notas de desalojo o de 3 días de desalojo. No hemos visto ninguna de las notas que hayan llegado a la corte.
Okay, thank you. I will hand it over to Joanne.
Okay, so next we'll cover the eviction process pretty generally as the process is in California.
Vamos a continuar con cuál es el proceso del desalojo en California.
Before a landlord can actually evict you from your home, you would have to receive some form of a failure to pay rent notice. And this is usually a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. This would then give you 3 days to pay the rent before a landlord can begin the eviction process in court.
El propietario tiene que notificar de alguna forma el hecho antes del desalojo para que usted, para evitar el desalojo. Le tienen que dar una notificación de 3 días, como poco, antes de que él pueda iniciar cualquier proceso que lleve a la corte.
This chart here shows a general process in a larger overview. First, after receiving the eviction notice, you would have whatever number of days is listed in that notice to pay all of the rent that is requested. And if not, the landlord would then file a summons and complaint. And we talked about that summons before. That's required for the landlord to serve on you in order to request your appearance in court. After that, you would have 5 court days in order to file an answer with the court. That answer is multiple pages. It has a lot of different check boxes. We highly recommend you complete that with an attorney. You can also go to the Self-Help Center, which is in downtown San Jose at the Family Justice Center. They would be able to help guide you in filling out that answer form and get that filed at the clerk's office in a different courthouse. And if you can't make it to the Self-Help Center, we can help you at our Eviction Help Center. 20 days after you file an answer, you would then be you would have a hearing set for trial. And at that trial, you would be able to present your case about why you weren't able to pay and what you're doing now to try to make the payment if you filed for rent relief. And then if you won that case, you would be able to stay in your unit. If you lost that case and had a judgment made against you by the judge, then the sheriff could then lock you out of that unit. But there is one other thing that you can do before the sheriff locks you out of the unit, which we'll get into later. On the other side of this chart, if you do not file an answer within 5 court days, then a default judgment can be requested by the landlord and you would automatically lose the case, and then the sheriff could evict you and lock you out of your unit as well. But again, there's one final thing that you can file if you're not able to respond in time and you want one last chance.
Esta es una gráfica general de cuál es el proceso completo del desalojo judicial. Primero se recibe una notificación que especifica el número de días en el cual le requieren la renta que está a deber. Después de eso viene lo que es la citación y la demanda. Esto es un documento que tiene que servir el propietario del apartamento y es requerido para que para que ellos puedan seguir con el proceso judicial. Normalmente en 5 días tienen que dar una respuesta. Es obligatorio dar la respuesta. Estamos recomendando que por favor lo consulten con un abogado para que así sea, porque el proceso tiene muchas siglas y muchas palabras de abogacía. Para completar este papel, pueden ir al centro de autoayuda. Hay uno en San José, en el centro de San José, donde allí le van a facilitar cómo hacer el documento y le van a mandar a una oficina diferente para completar el documento en la corte. Les podemos ayudar también nosotros en el centro de ayuda a la vivienda y al desalojo. Ese es el siguiente paso. Después de hacer la respuesta y de completar este documento, en torno a unos 20 días, viene a haber una audiencia, una preaudiencia y una audiencia en el cual usted va a formar su caso. Usted va a tener que empezar a explicar por qué no se ha pagado la renta, qué es lo que ha sucedido, por qué no han... qué es lo que tienen que explicarlo antes de que todo esto vaya a un juicio en una audiencia. Después es el juicio pues se viene a solucionar y entonces o se gana el caso y entonces usted permanece en la casa, o bien se pierde el caso, en cuyo caso el sheriff procede a desalojar al inquilino. Hay una cosa más de la cual vamos a hablar un poquito más adelante que se puede hacer para evitar el desalojo del inquilino. Esto vamos a hablar en un momentito. Por otro lado, hemos dicho qué pasa si hacemos la respuesta por parte de la citación y la demanda. Si no hubiera respuesta, si ustedes no responden en esos tiempos dados, que son unos 5 días, el propietario puede requerir directamente, le puede declarar que haya una sentencia en rebeldía, lo cual significa que automáticamente se desaloja al inquilino. Pero recordamos, hay una forma también de evitar que se desaloje al inquilino y vamos a hablar de ello en un poco.
So as stated in the previous chart, right before the sheriff performs what's called a lockout, there is something called a relief from forfeiture that can occur. So even if you already received a court order, the court can reinstate the tenancy if the complaint is based on the rental debt accumulated because of COVID-19 financial hardship, and the tenant applies for rental assistance and is approved for the full amount asked for in the notice. This application must be made before a sheriff finalizes the eviction.
Aunque usted haya recibido una orden judicial, existe otro paso que se llama el alivio de la confiscación. En este caso, hay una orden de la Corte en la que puede establecerse el arrendamiento si es que la queja que usted ha hecho se basa porque no ha pagado debido a todas las dificultades financieras por la pandemia del COVID. El inquilino que ha solicitado esta asistencia del alquiler y ha sido aprobado, tiene que estar como en pausa. Por lo tanto, la solicitud para que esto suceda tiene que hacerse antes de que suceda el cierre patronal, antes de que el sheriff decida que se le puede desalojar.
At our Housing and Eviction Prevention Center, we recommend that you reach out to us as soon as you receive any notice to pay or quit if you owe rent, so that we can help you navigate the process. And we can help you apply for rent and utility assistance from local agencies and other resources. And then finally, we can help you navigate the eviction process by referring you to legal help to help navigate the court system.
Les recomendamos contactarnos. Estamos en el Centro de Prevención del Desalojo y de la Vivienda. Tan pronto como ustedes tengan una nota de desalojo, tráiganosla. Podemos ayudarles refiriéndonos a la deuda que puedan tener referida a la renta. Les podemos ayudar con la solicitud y todos los documentos que tengan que ver con el proceso de desalojo. Les podemos facilitar también recursos que existen de forma local y también les tenemos una colaboración con abogados de forma gratuita para que les puedan ayudar en todo el proceso porque es muy confuso.
Our Housing and Eviction Prevention Center is back in person at the public library. However, for the rest of this month, we will be there each Thursday from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. And we're no longer taking appointments. We're accepting people on a walk-in basis. We're located at 585 Franklin Street in the first floor program room in Mountain View, California, 94041. And we can assist applicants by phone or virtually if you can't make it in person by going to www.mountainview.gov/eviction help clinics. to enter our Zoom meeting during our center hours. And when you enter that URL, you will be taken directly into our Zoom meeting. You won't have to register. However, beginning in May, our Housing and Eviction Prevention Center will be open on the first and third Thursdays only from the same time between 1 to 5 p.m.
Estamos de vuelta en la biblioteca con el Centro de Vivienda y Prevención del Desalojo. Estamos atendiendo en persona. De momento, por este mes, solamente estamos los jueves entre la 1 y las 5 de la tarde. No estamos tomando citas. Puede presentarse, el primero que llega va a ser atendido por una persona. Todavía también lo podemos hacer a través del teléfono o de forma virtual por Zoom. Para eso, tiene que ir a mountainview.gov/Eviction Help Clinics y entonces ahí entrar directamente a la reunión de Zoom. No tiene que registrarse y puede entrar directamente siempre y cuando sea durante el horario en el que estamos en la biblioteca. Eso es los jueves entre 1 y 5 de la tarde. Eso es solamente por este mes. A partir del mes de mayo el centro va a estar abierto, pero solamente van a ser el primer y tercer jueves de mes entre la 1 y las 5 de la tarde.
And now we'll take another break to see if anyone has any questions about what we've covered so far. Please feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute you, or you can type in the chat or the Q&A box.
Vamos a tomar una pequeña pausa en este momento para ver si hay alguna pregunta o les podemos ayudar con algún caso. Puede levantar la mano en el chat o puede escribir su pregunta en la sección de preguntas y respuestas, como prefiera.
And also, please feel free to take down our contact information here if this is your first time, so that you can contact us at our Mountain View Housing Helpline, which is the number you see on the screen on the bottom right.
Y por favor, tómese la libertad también de tomar nota de nuestro contacto. Tiene ahí en la diapositiva a derecha abajo el teléfono y nuestro correo electrónico es el centro de ayuda. Nos puede contactar para lo que sea necesario.
Okay, so we'll keep going, and now we're going to get into resources.
Vamos a continuar y ahora vamos a empezar con recursos.
We have a lot of resources available for review online at mountainview.gov/COVID-19 housing relief, and our main website at mountainview.gov/rent stabilization. These include our Eviction Help Center, emergency rental assistance, mediation for landlords and tenants, temporary rent reductions, and affordable housing, as well as other COVID-19 relief programs.
Tenemos muchos recursos disponibles en la página web de la ciudad, todos en línea. Puede meterse directamente en mountainview.gov/COVID-19 Housing Relief. Lo tiene en español también, mountainview.gov/ayuda a viviendas COVID-19. Hay diferentes pestañas y programas que puede ver, tener ahí la información sobre el centro de ayuda al desalojo, pero también hay otros como los servicios de asistencia para la emergencia en el alquiler, centros de mediación entre inquilinos y propietarios, tenemos reducciones de renta temporales, vivienda asequible y otros recursos de alivio de renta.
We also have another upcoming webinar next week on April 28th. We'll be holding a stakeholder meeting at 6 p.m. Regarding base rent and concessions focused on the tenant's point of view. And at this meeting, we will be asking tenants to provide their opinions about our clarification of the law regarding base rent and concessions. Many tenants recently have received concessions to reduce their rent temporarily. Sorry about that. To reduce their rent temporarily, but this meeting will discuss how that is treated in rent-controlled units. Landlords will have a separate meeting to do the same, and we encourage all tenants to participate in this meeting to understand your rights and how these clarifications are being shaped by other stakeholders.
Tenemos una reunión más la próxima semana. El día 28 de abril a las 6 de la tarde hay una reunión sobre las partes interesadas sobre el alquiler base y las concesiones. En este seminario vamos a pedir las opiniones de los inquilinos, porque hay muchos inquilinos que han recibido concesiones o descuentos para disminuir la renta de forma temporal. Entonces queremos preguntarles cómo y qué es lo que necesitan saber y para saber cómo han sido tratadas estas concesiones, y que sepan que el de las 6 de la tarde está enfocado en los inquilinos. Los propietarios van a tener otro seminario diferente enfocado a los propietarios, pero en este seminario hacia los inquilinos se van a discutir cuáles son los derechos que tienen referente a las concesiones y a la renta base.
And you can register for this meeting at mountainview.gov/RSP webinars.
Se puede registrar para esta reunión en mountainview.gov/RSP webinars. Lo tiene ahí arriba.
And then finally, we have a number of legal resources available in our county if you are finding yourself needing legal representation for unlawful detainer issues, any other housing related issue, or anything particularly complicated that's leading to eviction. We have the Community Legal Services of East Palo Alto helping us on Thursdays at our Housing and Eviction Prevention Center. And then we also have the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley that supports us, as well as Bay Area Legal Aid in this county. And if you need other sort of legal assistance, there is the Santa Clara County Bar Association Lawyer Referral Service, as well as the Superior Court Self-Help Center. And as we discussed before, the Superior Court Self-Help Center can help you with filing your answers if you need that last minute assistance. They're located at the Family Justice Center located in downtown San Jose. And then the filing for that answer would be in a different courthouse at the downtown Superior Courthouse.
Aquí tenemos un listado de todos los recursos legales que estamos utilizando en estos momentos. Disponibles en el condado para asuntos que tengan que ver con retenciones ilegales o con complicaciones que se den, que den lugar a un desalojo. Tenemos la Asociación de East Palo Alto, Asociación Legal de East Palo Alto. Los jueves tenemos también en el centro del desalojo de la biblioteca, vienen también una asociación de abogados que nos ayuda con toda la documentación. También nos están apoyando la Fundación de Silicon Valley de Abogacía. También tenemos la Asociación Legal de Santa Clara y tenemos el apoyo también y nos están apoyando la Corte Superior de Justicia, que es la que hemos mencionado antes, que nos están ayudando con las respuestas que se les da a la Corte. Es donde está el Centro de Justicia Familiar, está en el centro de San José. Y ellos son los que, una vez que ellos facilitan la respuesta, nos ayudan con la respuesta, lo envían a otra oficina, a otra corte, que es el que sigue el proceso.
That is the end of our presentation. So if anybody has any questions about what we just covered, or if you have any clarifying questions you'd like to ask, please don't hesitate to raise your hands or type your question in the chat.
Este es el final de la presentación, pero por favor, si tiene alguna duda, alguna pregunta, este es el momento, lo puede escribir en el chat, puede levantar la mano, no dude y comuníquenos sus dudas.
Okay, I see a hand in the chat, so I'll go ahead and let Philip Cosby speak. You can now unmute yourself.
Thank you, Joanne.
Sorry.
Are you still have the virtual office hours on Tuesdays?
Yes, we do. That will be held Tuesdays from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And that will be a separate link than the usual link that we use for our Thursday Eviction and Prevention Center.
Right, I saw it cited at the bottom of the web page on one of your slides. Thank you.
No problem.
La pregunta era si todavía estaban la clínica de desalojo que se hacen los martes, y la respuesta es que sí, están todavía de forma virtual, están de 10 a 12, pero el enlace es otro diferente.
And I just wanted to mention before we jump off, since the first part of the presentation wasn't in Spanish, that really the key takeaway is that if you receive any sort of termination notice or court paperwork, please come and visit us at the in-person housing and eviction prevention program. We'll be at the library on the first floor program room, and we're there from 1 to 5 every Thursday this month. And thank you, Joanne. And next month will be the first and third Thursdays of each month. So please come and see us and we can sort of guide you through this process, but just don't move from your home just because you receive a notice. Come and see us first.
Y solo para clarificar, y quiero mencionar que como la primera parte de la presentación no se hizo en español, los puntos más clave que hay que sacar de esa primera parte es que si le entregan un tipo de nota de desalojo de cualquier tipo, por favor venga a vernos al centro del desalojo de la biblioteca los jueves. Nota de desalojo o cualquier papel importante que pudiéramos ayudarle con ello, venga a la biblioteca. Estamos en el primer piso, en el salón comunitario, los jueves de este mes de 1 a 5 de la tarde, y a partir de mayo va a ser el primer y tercer jueves de mes en el mismo horario de 1 a 5. Visítenos, tráiganos los documentos, explíquenos su situación y la podemos guiar con el proceso. Pero por favor, una de las cosas importantes es no se mueva, no tiene que salir de la casa aunque reciba una nota de desalojo. Visítenos y la ayudaremos.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands and no other questions. So I think we'll go ahead and end it for the evening. We just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us and learn a little bit about what's going on with evictions and the current, excuse me, and the current tenant protections. We will be sure to send you a copy of this PowerPoint and the recording.
Muchas gracias. Si no hay más preguntas, vamos a terminar la sesión. Solamente quiero agradecer el que se han unido a nosotros por todo con estos calendarios tan ocupados que hay, y haberse unido con nosotros para saber sobre las últimas novedades que hay sobre el desalojo. Por favor, simplemente tengan en cuenta que les vamos a mandar una copia con la grabación del audio, y con todo esto, pues queremos darles unas buenas noches.
There will also be a link to a survey. So if you have time to fill out a survey about the webinar, and if you thought it was helpful, we'd greatly appreciate that as well.
También en el correo electrónico les vamos a enviar un enlace que haya una encuesta. Si les ha gustado esta presentación y les ha parecido útil, agradeceremos que lo pongan así en esa encuesta, por favor.
And finally, thank you to Joanne for presenting with me, and thank you to Esperanza and Elena for being available for translation. We couldn't do it without you guys.
Y quiero agradecer a Joan por la presentación y a las traductoras Esperanza y Elena por su tiempo.
Okay, have a great night.
Que tengan buenas noches.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Adiós, buenas noches.